Welcome to the post-game show. I'm Tony Keller from the Globe and Mail. We're going to walk you through what happened this evening, who said what, and what it all adds up to. I'm joined by a distinguished panel from left to right. Janice Stein of the Munk School of Global Affairs, Doug Saunders from the Globe and Mail, John Ibbitson from the Globe and Mail, and also, there's John Ibbitson from the Globe and Mail, and also providing us with data insights from Facebook, Kevin Chan. Will be coming back to him in a moment to get a sense of what people were talking about on social media and how it all adds up. I want to start by talking to our panel here and get their sense of, first of all, the obvious question, who won tonight? And Janice Stein, I'll start with you. Who won?
Tony, I don't think there is one clear winner in the debate, and I don't think there was a knockout in the debate either. All three leaders really knew their files. That having been said, probably Mulcair was not as strong as he might have been, especially on the trade issues, for example. Harper was able to defend some difficult files, largely because the other two didn't really go after him in a sustained way. And I would suspect that our viewers think that the emotional highlight of the evening was Trudeau's impassioned defense of his father's record and his own record on civil rights.
And we may be coming back to that in just a moment. Doug, what stood out for you? Who do you think won the debate?
I mean, I hate to say it, but I think Stephen Harper probably came out ahead in this. This was Justin Trudeau's moment, though, in many respects. He found a new gear. He came out fighting in a way that he hadn't before. He had a rhetorical position that got a lot of killer lines, but they weren't foreign policy lines. They may resonate in the future. I think his digression into his father, which I think would have been seen as a suicidal move before, he actually got away with, but that was all about domestic politics. And I think Stephen Harper managed to sort of sit back like the Cheshire Cat and allow the two parties, the two opposition parties, weaknesses to cancel each other out. They really weren't able to attack him. This is a government that has done a very poor job on most foreign affairs files during its term in office and was not challenged on most of those failures because the other parties had their own issues with each other and so on.
John, what do you think of that?
Well, look, this is going to sound a bit platitudinous, but I actually do believe the Canadian voter won in this debate. This was the most substantive, detailed, thoughtful, carefully argued debate we've seen of the very many debates that we've had. And if you don't have a very clear sense of where the three parties are now on aid, on refugees, on trade issues, on climate change, then I don't know what more we need to offer you. In terms of the horse race stuff, look, Justin Trudeau has, to everyone's considerable surprise, developed a persona that is aggressive, that is combative, that is confident, and that works in debates. Thomas Mulcair has developed a persona in which he stands back, he's calm, he's reasonable, he's the authority figure, he's the experienced cabinet minister, and it doesn't work for him. It hasn't worked now throughout all of these debates. I frankly thought it was working. I was wrong. And to the extent that I was wrong, he was doing the same thing tonight, and I don't think it was working for him tonight.
We're going to come back. We're going to come back to this conversation in just a second. One thing I want to look at now is, so Facebook has done an analysis of the moment in the debate when conversation, interest, and comments just spiked right up. We're going to take a look at a tape of that moment when the conversation spiked. Here it is.
Say, Mr. Trudeau, will you never be able to revoke citizenship from somebody?
Yeah.
Is that your position?
No.
Because we revoked the citizenship already of war criminals. And why would we not revoke the citizenship of people convicted of terrorist offenses against this country? This was a bill put forward. This was a bill put forward by a member of Parliament who is himself an immigrant, Devinder Shori, this is not the standards we expect. Immigrants, Canadians, all of us who are here expect that we would have a minimum bar, that people would not, people who come here would not be guilty of trying to plan terrorist
Mr.
attacks
Harper,
against this country.
A Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian, and you devalue the citizenship of every Canadian in this place and in this country when you break down and make it conditional for anyone. We have the rule of law in this country, and you can't take away citizenship if you don't like what someone does.
The individual
you
question,
can't do that.
The individual question, Mr. Trudeau, is convicted of planning
should be
the most
in jail,
heinous
and
terrorist
that's where
ever against this country. A few blocks from here, he would have detonated bombs that would have been on a scale of 9/11. This country has every right to
we are
revoke
not
the
a country
citizenship of an
dominated by
individual like
fear.
that.
We are a country of laws and rights.
Well, there you are. That was the clip that, as I said, Facebook determined generated the greatest interest. That was the moment of the debate when interest spiked. Bring it back to the panel. Start with you, Janice. Are you surprised that's the moment when conversation jumped?
Actually not. Doug and I were talking, and I was saying to him, this is the hottest button issue, actually, especially among the ethnic communities in this country. I've been stopped and had conversations with different ethnic communities in this country who are convinced that their citizenship can be revoked. And when you start a discussion, no, it's under specific circumstances. You have to be convicted of an act of terror. That doesn't wash. There is a visceral fear and negative reaction among communities in this country when it comes to revocation of citizenship. Now, I think you heard the Prime Minister and Justin Trudeau really go at each other. There is division of opinion in this country on this issue. Both of them made strong arguments, and you felt it in that spike of interest.
Yeah, and John Ibbotson, who do you think benefits from that division of opinion on this issue?
Look, each leader is speaking to his own community. Conservative law and order types for the Conservatives and progressives for the Liberals. But don't forget, this is the only Conservative government in the developed world that relies on immigrant voters for support. The Conservatives would not be doing this if they did not believe, at least among some immigrant voters, a feeling that security issues outweigh citizenship rights. And for better or for worse, I think both leaders there were talking over each other to a group of voters that they're convinced they have to hold on to.
Doug, thoughts on this?
Well, this is a classic example of Stephen Harper having taken something that is almost meaningless and turned it into an explosive issue that either is going to work to his benefit or is going to explode in his face. I mean, the revocation of citizenship, which would only apply to people who have 2 passports, is a penal act that would be used so rarely, because look at it this way, somebody's convicted of terrorism. Remember, you have to be first convicted in court of terrorism. And then Canada is going to say, we're not going to punish this guy, we're going to shift the onus of the penal system onto some other country. There aren't many other countries we want to throw that burden of punishing a convicted terrorist onto. We're not going to do it with any of our allies, for sure. So it's something that's so minuscule and rare, yet has become a symbolic hot button issue that either, as Janice said, it's going to cause Harper to lose the support of the Pakistanis and Lebanese and the other new Canadian groups who are core to his party's new constituency, or it's going to galvanize his base, it's going to galvanize some of those communities, and it's going to work. It has absolutely no meaning in the larger world of policy. It's entirely, as Justin Trudeau said toward the end, a political football.
But in terms of this election, that moment, who benefits from that moment? Or is it merely that Tom Mulcair maybe is the one who doesn't benefit?
Tom Mulcair doesn't benefit.
That's right.
It's like the niqab debate. Again,
exactly.
The polls show there was a surprising amount of support in Quebec and outside Quebec for the Conservative position on limiting the use of niqab at citizenship ceremonies. Exactly what you said. Such a tiny percentage of the population that would be affected by this. It's the same thing. These are football. These are hot button issues. The Conservatives
and they're both things that probably wouldn't survive a full Supreme Court challenge.
Both the Conservatives and the Liberals are trending up in the polls now that these things are being taken off.
Now that they're having
once
a fight.
again, it's the NDP that finds itself on
But
the
you know what,
sidelines.
John, what's interesting here is this one really divides Conservative support. because it divides the ethnic voters who have voted for Harper in the past for a whole variety of reasons from his base. So you'd think he'd stay away from that.
But I'm not sure that all ethnic voters are driven away by this. Some may be, like the NACAP debate, some find it an attack on their own particular community. Others would say, you know what, in order to protect security concerns, I'm not so sure, I don't agree.
Okay, let's now jump over to Kevin Chan of Facebook. He's going to take a quick look at some of the things that people have been talking about during the course of the election campaign, including the issues that were big with people tonight. Here's Kevin Chan from Facebook.
Thank you very much, Tony. So I think we'll start with looking at the leader conversations. So we've talked a little bit about what folks on the panel think, in terms of which leader kind of won the debate. This is interesting. So this is looking at real-time data pulled during the actual debate tonight. And we can see these are the rankings. So Mr. Trudeau ranking number 1, Mr. Harper number 2, and Mr. Mulcair number 3. So these are, again, real-time over the last 2 hours. And what's interesting about this is if we look at comparing the data over the course of time, when we look at the beginning of the election campaign, August 6th was the Maclean's debate, we said Mr. Harper was in fact in the lead for that debate when the economy dominated. And as we get closer to the date, so last week, the French leaders debate on Radio Canada, we saw that Mr. Trudeau, for the first time in a leaders debate, actually went and surpassed Mr. Harper as he did tonight. And what these are real conversations by real Canadians on Facebook. So that means a post, a comment, a share, or a like. These are things that if you were on Facebook or I were on Facebook, these are things we're writing to our family and friends as we're watching the debate. So this is very interesting. We don't know if these are positive or negative sentiments, but we do know that it gives a measure of the intensity of the conversation of Canadians with respect to their leaders. And so for the first time last week, as I said, Mr. Trudeau overtook Mr. Harper. Mr. Harper, although has fallen behind in this debate, over the course, when we look at the course of the last month and a bit throughout the campaign, Mr. Harper is clearly ahead in that conversation. It's not surprising, as the incumbent Prime Minister, that he would dominate the conversation. So what we want to do tonight was look at the specific data set from the conversations happening during debate. And again, interesting, and we'll see whether or not that leads to changes in the aggregate picture. But again, Mr. Trudeau has surpassed Mr. Harper in the conversation numbers.
And just remind us again how exactly you've determined these conclusions, how you've analyzed this data.
Sure. So again, we are looking at the conversations of all Canadians on Facebook. So to date, since the beginning of June, when we start tracking this, we're talking about 3 million unique Canadians that have had comments and shares and likes and posts about the election, and together they've had 21 million interactions. And so this is looking at it as an aggregate in an anonymized way. Canadians are engaged on the election, that's the first thing. And the second thing is we're able to look and see which leaders are really the ones that are causing the most conversation on Facebook across Canada.
Right, and just to be clear, with this graph that's up right now with Stephen Harper way in the lead in terms of conversation, that doesn't mean anything about his popularity. This could be negative conversation, it could be positive conversation.
That's correct. He's popular in terms of volume of conversation, right. But we don't know if that's a positive or a negative sentiment.
All right, Kevin, thanks very much. We'll come back to Kevin Chan in just a moment. Let's come back to the panel here. So, John Ibbitson, what do you make of this? Justin Trudeau, for the first time, is most talked about. Is that an important objective for him in this election campaign?
Oh, sure. I mean, this election campaign began with the Liberals in third and showing dangerous signs of trending down rather than up. 3 weeks before the election campaign, it's in terms of polls, he's at or near the top. In terms of engagement, he's at or near the top. He has won every debate he's been in, according to the popular consensus. He's in a great place. And Tom Mulcair must be hoping for October 2nd. The last debate, get it over with, and then start to rebuild, because these debates have just been punishing for the NDP. Maybe things will change on October 2nd in the last French language debate, but up until now, he has not had a good night.
Janice, anything you want to get in?
I agree completely with Johnny. It's actually stunning when you think where this started. That Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party were in third place, and all kinds of questions about the credibility of Justin Trudeau as a result of really successive, strong performances. Those questions about his credibility as a contender have largely gone away, and you see a reversal of the NDP and Liberal positions over the course of this debate. So I think John is entirely right. These debates are absolutely punishing for the NDP. The big question going out of this is, will we have a two-party race, or will we continue to have a three-party race? We'll know more when you tell us whether it's positive or negative comments, Kevin.
Doug, thoughts on this?
I think you're right. There's a convergence almost in some ways. I mean, we saw that in this debate, in that there are quite a few policy areas where the space between the parties is not great. When they tried to have a debate about Ukraine, it flopped because they have pretty much the same position. When they tried to have a debate about refugees, the space between them is actually about this much. It wasn't much of a debate. Even on Syria policy, really, the difference between Stephen Harper's doing hardly anything with Syria and the other parties doing nothing with Syria is minuscule. We see a left-leaning Liberal Party and a center-right-leaning, by its standards, NDP that could cross each other on many of these issues and so on. The NDP could fade out in that equation. Mind you, a lot could change. We've seen so many elections recently that have defied expectations at this very point when you think something.
I never thought I would disagree with Doug Saunders, but I got to jump in. The fact that for the Conservatives, we are in combat against Syria. For the other two parties, we do not need to be in combat against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Is crucial, and it was crucial in the debate, and will be crucial in terms of the election too, I suspect.
I think John's absolutely right, Doug. That is there is one significant policy difference. There is a difference also, and maybe that's an interesting way to look at this, Tony. Where do the NDP and the Liberals diverge, right? Because if we're trying to see what the policy space is, well, there was a real sharp exchange on C51. Between the
I'm just
parties.
going to jump in and interrupt you guys here for just a moment. We have got Thomas Mulcair at the podium about to start his press conference. We'll go to him right now.
We're planning to win on October 19th and form a strong, stable majority New Democrat government for the first time in Canadian history.
And my second question is, okay, thanks.
Mr. Mulcair, you were asked during the debate in what situation you would support military intervention, if not the fight against the Islamic State. You basically said it has to be NATO or UN. Does that conflict with responsibility to protect? Is there any situation where the Canadian military could be used where it's not a sanctioned mission through NATO or the UN?
It's theoretical, but what you have seen us do is support on a UN mandate under the duty to protect, the responsibility to protect of the UN, and that was in the case of the Libyan mission. So we've shown that in that case we were willing to go that route.
M. Mulcair, dites-moi, d'abord, est-ce que vous êtes satisfait de la quantité de Français qu'il y avait dans le débat ce soir? Et est-ce que vous avez l'impression que la performance que vous avez à faire aujourd'hui va vous permettre d'arrêter un peu cette glissade que les sondages semblent montrer?
Sur la première question, vous voyez, on voit les vieux routiers qui réussissent à placer deux quand même. Sur la première question, c'est la première fois de ma carrière dans une telle situation, on fait un débat où on s'efforce de faire ça bilingue, mais il n'y avait pas de règle pour poser un nombre X de questions dans une langue ou dans l'autre. Je me suis efforcé d'utiliser le français dans chaque segment, dans chaque partie du débat, mais on va analyser, on se ferait expliquer quel pourcentage et ainsi de suite pour voir si la formule peut être retenue. Mais j'ai trouvé ça intéressant parce que j'ai aussi senti qu'on était dans une salle de gens bien informés et qui étaient capables de comprendre très largement lorsqu'on parlait dans les deux langues. Alors, ça m'encourage. J'espère qu'on pourrait le faire. Peut-être qu'il y a des manières de l'encadrer un petit peu plus pour veiller à ce qu'il y ait vraiment égalité des langues officielles. Mais moi, je suis ravi de ce qui s'est passé ici ce soir. Ça a permis de contraster, parler des valeurs qui doivent informer notre attitude à l'international. Et un gouvernement du NPD va refléter pour les gens les valeurs qui considèrent très importantes, comme la paix, la démocratie, solidarité et le développement durable. Ce sont tous des choses qui sont très importantes à travers le pays.
Mr. Mulcair, there are a number of polls that have shown that your support in Quebec is slipping, and I'm wondering why you think that is, and what the plan is in these next few weeks of the campaign to try to turn that around.
Our support in Quebec is at historic levels. We're thrilled with the campaign. You know and I know that there are always going to be some issues that come up and affect things as you go along, but frankly, I've always been that person to talk very openly, to share and understand people's concerns, but to stand on questions of important principle. And that's what we've been doing, and we're going to continue to respect people's concerns and dialogue with them and engage with them. But we are at a level of support right now that is a historic high for the NDP, and on October 19th, watch us go.
1 minute left. Mr. Mulcair, do you think it's fair to go after Mr. Trudeau for actions that his father did decades ago?
I don't think that that's what happened, sir. I think that what happened was I was referring to the fact that the NDP was the only party in 1970 that stood up in the House of Commons and said the War Measures Act, putting hundreds of Canadians in jail without accusation or without trial, was wrong. We had the courage then, and you have to have the courage of your convictions. When I started the debate against Bill C-51, the vast majority of Canadians were in favor of it, but we said that we were going to stand on a strong question of principle against Bill C-51. Mr. Trudeau supported it. That's the simple fact. We were talking about a historic fact, and I'm very glad we did, because Canadians can see that there is a consistency in the NDP of standing up for what Canadians consider to be important, which is the defense of their rights and freedoms. And it's the NDP that has the proudest and strongest track record of all political parties in defending rights and freedoms. Thank you. Merci. Merci.
So there's Tom Mulcair's press conference. We expect Justin Trudeau will come on in just a moment, so we may be cutting away. I want to come back to the panel. John Ibbotson, what did you make of that? That was an interesting exchange between Trudeau and Mulcair. There's Mulcair's comment on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was, again, the calm, measured, everything is fine, please don't panic, anyone who's an NDP supporter in Quebec. But I believe that, look, for all three of them, they have not changed their game. They believe this is the way that they should go. Tom Mulcair believes that this is the tone, this is the approach that he needs, and that over the long term, and maybe not right now, but over the long term, 3 weeks left, it will work best for him. Justin Trudeau has already proved that he can get himself into the game with a more competitive approach, and Stephen Harper just talks to the people who might support Stephen Harper and tries to ignore the rest.
Doug Saunders, you were saying earlier you thought Stephen Harper had actually won the debate. You thought, in spite of yourself, you thought he'd put on the best performance. Tell me a little bit more about why that, because it seemed to me like he kept trying to not draw distinctions in some cases, but in many cases say, look, these guys aren't planning on doing anything all that different from what we're already doing.
And they couldn't call him out much on the things that he could most be called out on. They could call him out for failing on the terms that they believe in, for trying to have got the Keystone Pipeline, not for the things that are failures on his own terms, for failing to get the Keystone Agreement, which was largely a result of a failure to engage in issues like climate and so on that matter to the Americans. It was the result of a frankly anti-American stance that got mentioned. It's probably the most anti-American government Canada's had in recent times. And that failure to engage in the institutions and relationships that are important, including the relationship with the United States, caused a failure of the Keystone Agreement. An obsession with domestic issues like the dairy lobby caused us to almost drop the ball on two important trade agreements and have them severely delayed and so on. The opposition leaders could have called out Mr. Harper on those things and said, you have failed economically, you have failed on international trade because of your obsessions and so on. But because they don't believe that we should have those international trade agreements, because they don't believe we should have the Keystone, they failed to get him on his biggest weakness.
Janice, thoughts on this?
I think Doug is actually right that, Mulcair and Trudeau didn't really challenge Harper as they might have, because they themselves are not advocates of the position. That made it very difficult. And that was really obvious, I think, in the Mulcair-Harper exchange on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There's a strong argument there for the auto sector, as we all know. Never mind the dairy and the chicken. There's a really big issue in the auto sector. That one really didn't come out at the top of the debate. Just come back to a second to the clip you showed us, Tony. I thought it was very interesting when the reporter asked Mulcair, do you think it was fair to go after Trudeau for what his father did?
Yeah. I'm going to break right now because we've got Justin Trudeau at the podium. We're going to go to him right now.
If a Liberal government would continue that focus, or if you would champion champion other development issues?
As I talked about during this debate, our focus is on helping the most vulnerable, and obviously the work that Canada has started on child and maternal health is an extremely important one that we will continue. On top of that, we will ensure that Canada is offering support to organizations and initiatives that fully support the complete range of reproductive and maternal health services, including abortions.
Mr. Trudeau, you suggested that if Stephen Harper's place in the world were more prominent, or if he had not lessened our role in the world, we would have more authority to tell Vladimir Putin to get out of Ukraine or whatever. At what point is that not just a platitude? What does that actually mean? And, can you actually back that up with anything concrete?
For sure. If Canada hadn't lost its seat on the United Nations Security Council, we would have a much stronger voice to talking across the table to Vladimir Putin. If we were actually still a country of respect at the UN, a country that actually works substantively and meaningfully with international partners at multilateral tables, we would have seen a much better capacity to be effective in sanctions, in holding strong as part of NATO. This country has chosen to use a megaphone instead of actually worry about people listening to them, and that unfortunately is something that has to change.
M. Trudeau, qu'est-ce que vous espériez atteindre comme objectif dans ce débat? Et avez-vous eu l'impression que vous étiez par moments un peu trop agressif dans votre approche? La foule vous a hué même à un moment donné.
Vous savez très bien que je suis très passionné pour notre pays et l'avenir qu'on est en train d'offrir à nos enfants et nos petits-enfants. J'ai un plan pour investir dans nos communautés. J'ai un plan pour reprendre la place du Canada à l'échelle mondiale et internationale. Et donc, j'ai été très content de pouvoir partager cette vision et ce plan aujourd'hui. C'était le but du débat et je trouve que j'ai eu la chance de partager ma vision, mais aussi ma passion pour ce pays.
Okay. Mr. Trudeau, I just asked Mr. Mulcair what he would do if Parliament is prorogued by a Harper minority. What's your strategy in the case of that scenario?
One thing that is very clear about elections is that it's an opportunity for Canadians to pick who will form their next government. And I look forward to seeing on October 19th Canadians choosing a better government, one that actually invests in our communities and restores Canada's place on the world stage.
Thank you.
Sir, until now, mostly you've shied away from invoking your father's name on the campaign trail, yet tonight you went in at it with both legs, both feet. Why is that?
My father passed away 15 years ago today, and he was obviously on my mind, and I was happy to talk about him as a son who loves his father very, very much.
Je repose la question en français. Est-ce que c'était... qu'est-ce que vous pensez d'avoir utilisé la mémoire de votre père dans ce débat-là? Certains l'ont regardé en se demandant si c'était pas un peu exagéré.
Mon père nous a quittés 15 ans aujourd'hui même, le 28 septembre 2000. Et évidemment, en tant que fils très fier d'être fils de mon père, j'ai choisi de partager à quel point je l'aime et je l'aimerai toujours. Merci beaucoup. Merci Thierry.
That's Justin Trudeau ending his press conference there. Let's talk a little bit about what he said. We'll get into some substance in just a moment, but John Ibbitson, you may not have caught it in French. The reporter in French said to him, using the memory of your father, don't you think that's a little exaggerated? Why did you do that?
Yeah, but I thought he handled it very, very well. It was 15 years ago today that Pierre Trudeau passed away. You could, when asked that in a scrum in this incredible media intense environment, you could go maudlin, you could do any number of things. What he did was hit exactly the right note. He was simple, he was sincere, I believed every single word of it. His dad's on his mind right now. We know how that feels, those of us who've lost a parent. And I thought it was highly effective.
I want to come back to some of the substantial issues. And Doug, you were talking about the places where the parties try to be different and the places where they try to sort of limit the daylight between them. I was struck by Stephen Harper talking about how he was confident there'd be a greenhouse gas agreement in Paris, and it seemed to be saying he'd be happy to sign along and to sign on. And Justin Trudeau said, "Hang on a second, you always talk like this. You don't actually mean this." What was your reaction to that exchange?
Well, I think Justin Trudeau was sticking on him very well in trying to attack him for that very calm, the thing Harper's good at, that calm, everything's okay, it's all been taken care of, it's all under control rhetoric. But I have a feeling he might get away with that, at least for some audiences. And for climate, it's particularly egregious. I mean, yes, he pulled out of the Kyoto Protocol. He is not engaged on climate in any way. The Americans are very frustrated that Canada's not been willing to work with them on a continental carbon agreement in any form. And on the international file, it's Canada's greatest weakness. It's caused a cascading set of other problems in international relations because it's made Canada not engaged in some of the most important global debates and issues.
No, there were actually two egregious moments in this debate. The first was that one when Stephen Harper said, "You can trust me. I'm a global leader in the fight against climate change." And the other was when Justin Trudeau said to Stephen Harper, "You talk a good game on trade, but you never deliver. Trust a Liberal government. We deliver on trade agreements." On both of those, you really had to sort of roll your eyes a bit.
Let's go back to Kevin Chan right now. We're going to take a look at some Facebook data. Kevin, what have you got for us now?
Sure. So here we have, again, in real time during the debate tonight, what were the most talked about issues with respect to foreign policy on Facebook. So we see that, perhaps not surprisingly, the issues of ISIS, of the refugee crisis, of terrorism, those things clearly dominated on Facebook as Canadians were having real conversations with family and friends as they were tuning into the debate tonight as well. And we see climate change and Arctic sovereignty as being ones that made the top list, top 5, but weren't as prominent. What we also then looked at was, going into the debate, how are these topics resonating across the country? And so this is interesting because we have a riding by riding level map, and it shows the intensity of the debate on particular issues, or the conversation on issues relative to each other. And so the darker colors would be the areas where the issues have greater resonance. And so when we look at climate change, perhaps not surprisingly, the western provinces, so Alberta, Saskatchewan, the BC coast, tend to be areas where, relatively speaking, the conversation focused more on climate change. What's interesting, though, is that in Quebec, where you would think that, historically this has been an issue of great resonance with voters in Quebec, that one didn't seem to have the same mind share in terms of conversation on Facebook as you might expect. If we look at the refugee crisis, here we see, contrary to the climate change one, that it was pretty evenly distributed. There weren't sort of particular pockets that were darker. This seems to be an issue that has touched all Canadians equally. And again, juxtapose that with foreign aid. So here we see the concentration on the question of foreign aid clearly was focused in Quebec. Not really present elsewhere in the country. And again, we had some time to talk about that tonight. We'll see whether or not this issue has resonance over time. But clearly, leading into the debate, it was Quebecers who really focused on that as an issue of foreign policy on Facebook. We did not see the same level of engagement elsewhere.
Interesting. And again, this says nothing about how they're discussing the issue, positively or negatively. It just says it's an issue that matters a great deal to the people we're talking about.
Exactly. So again, we're looking at comments, shares, likes, and posts, and these are Canadians spontaneously having real conversations with each other, and we're trying to show a little bit of that tonight.
Okay, Kevin, thanks very much. That's Kevin Chan of Facebook. I wonder, John, do you make anything of that people in Alberta and Saskatchewan are talking a great deal about climate change? Is that a positive for Stephen Harper or a negative?
Well, I think the more important number is 4, which is where climate change is at. And sadly, for those who worry a great deal about the environment, climate change, environmental issues, while we spend a lot of time on them here, spend a lot of time on the debates, they are not top of mind issues for most voters. It's usually about the economy, usually about jobs, about leadership. In this case, because it's strictly about foreign policy, it's obviously about the military mission in Syria and Iraq, and the security and refugee situation in general. Always climate change comes down near the bottom.
Doug, let's talk about some of the other substantial issues where, again, there may be light between the parties and there may not be so much. Stephen Harper at one point said he was really glad that the other parties are now taking the threat of Vladimir Putin seriously. He said, "You previously accused me of fear-mongering, now you're taking it seriously." Is there much light amongst the three parties on that issue, or are they fairly close together?
I think if you asked Stephen Harper 8 years ago what he would like to be having this debate about at this point, he would have said the military, his boosting of our pride in our military, of our funding in our military, of its great victories in Afghanistan and so on. He can't really talk about that at this point. Afghanistan is a mess. The handover of Afghanistan to Afghan forces has proved to be a disaster. The Taliban's moving back in, and the boost to the Canadian military that happened during that has now abated somewhat. Now we're dealing with issues of post-traumatic stress and things like that. So there's a whole set of things that I think he would have liked to have been boasting about on that front are off the table now, which might have distinguished him, although the Liberals, of course, initiated the Afghanistan war, or Canada's role in it, I should say. And that also makes any heated debate about the role in Syria a little more difficult. He does have the advantage of saying, I'm part of an international coalition. Paradoxically, that's the thing that Stephen Harper can say. This is an international institution that I have engaged in deeply that the other parties would not have, which allows them to ignore huge range of international things on everything from peacekeeping to disarmament to climate that he's not engaged in. But the fact is, he can't talk about the big thrust of the sort we had in Afghanistan. He can't say we're going to send 10,000 troops to Syria. We're not going to do that because of what happened in Afghanistan, because of what happened to some of our neighboring countries in Iraq and so on. We're very limited in the range of things we can talk about on the military front with any pride.
And John, let me bring up one other issue with you, which was the question of Israel. So Stephen Harper at one point was talking about Israel, and Justin Trudeau jumped in and said, you're trying to make it as if there's this profound disagreement among the three parties. He said there isn't. Do you pick up on that?
Yeah. In certain key areas, one might suspect it involves certain voting demographics here in Canada, Ukraine and Israel. There is virtually no daylight among any of the three parties. And in fact, a lot of us were surprised when, during the incursion into Gaza, the Liberals and the NDP completely supported the Conservative position, which was unreserved support. The same is true in Ukraine. On these, Justin Trudeau did maintain that Stephen Harper was trying to use it as a political football during the debate. But in fact, if it is, it's not a football that anybody, and I'm running out of metaphor here, they both want to hold the football very closely. Nobody, and I'm going to move on now because this is sports.
Let's also move on here, and we'll go back to Kevin Chan of Facebook. We're going to take a look at some more data, and I think, Kevin, we're going to talk about the key words associated with various leaders, what people think of or talk about when they talk about a particular leader. So take it away.
Sure, thank you. So again, Tony, you'll recall we were talking about real conversations among real Canadians across the country. We want to just reprise where we were when we first started the campaign. So around August 6th, the day of the Maclean's debate, we look at the four leaders that were on stage that day, and what were the terms, the keywords that were associated with them. Stephen Harper, the Netflix tax, because he had announced that he would never ever impose a Netflix tax the day before, so that was really taking up a lot of conversation time on Facebook. We see Mr. Mulcair, who talked about the federal minimum wage, and so that was something that he was associated with on that day. Mr. Trudeau talking about the middle class, something that he has returned to repeatedly over the course of the campaign, so we saw that all the way back at the beginning of the campaign, and Elizabeth May talking about her opposition to Bill C-51. If we fast forward to today, we looked at, this was not just the 2 hours of the debate, we looked at the entire day, September 28th. What we see are very different words associated with the leaders. Perhaps, not surprisingly, none of the things that were associated with them on the first, near the beginning of the campaign, are now relevant today in terms of keywords. Mr. Harper's human rights. Mr. Mulcair, Muslim Canadians, that may be a stand-in for his opposition to the niqab, which we saw coming out of the French language debate, the opposition to wearing or requiring to remove the veil while you're performing an oath of citizenship. Mr. Trudeau, he recently announced after the French debate some immigration policies, and so here we see this being associated with him as the most talked about keyword. And Elizabeth May, again, Islamic State, leading into the foreign policy debate in her position on that.
All right, Kevin, thanks very much. Kevin Chan from Facebook. Gentlemen, what do you make of that? The number one issue or the number one set of pair of words when people talk about Stephen Harper on Facebook is human rights. What do you make of that?
Well, it's probably not a positive conversation. It's not about, gee, I love Stephen Harper's position on human rights. What's also very interesting there is, again, not to be cynical, but these guys do focus groups. They do polling. It's perfectly clear that the Conservatives believe that on the issue of citizenship, if they could link it to terrorism, if they could link it to national security, they could score points. Justin Trudeau's probably did the same polling, same focus groups that said yes, but among our voters and our potential voters, if we can talk about double standards, if we can talk about a Canadian as a Canadian as a Canadian, we can score points. And so what's the thing that is most now associated with Justin Trudeau? Canadian citizenship. I think his focus groups were quite effective.
Doug, you surprised these are the key words in the middle of this particular election?
In any election, foreign policy, to the extent that it decides an election, is to the extent that it's domestic policy. So there's a very select constituency who worry about Bill C-51 and who make it an issue and who put it on their election signs on their front lawn. But there are probably a wider group of people who've heard things about this or that, about the revocation of citizenship, about increased surveillance, and that sort of thing, who are worried. The NICAB debate, such as it is not at all any part of foreign policy or security policy or anything like that. As John said, it's a pointillist tweak that caused an explosion, particularly in Quebec, of interest, despite having almost no consequence to it or anything like that. Yet these things, of course, are hard to calibrate, right? And in an election, particularly if it comes down to being more of a two-party race, your goal is not to get your party's supporters to vote for you. It's to get the other party's supporters to vote for you. And a lot of these things are targeted at getting people who are basically Tory voters to come out for the Tory vote, and that there has to be a limit to the extent to which that sort of game can be played. And I think if an opposition leader, if Justin Trudeau or someone could make a strong enough voice calling out the cynicism of those sort of moves, it possibly could work.
To wrap things up, I'll come back to where I started. John Ibbitson, who do you think benefited the most from this debate?
I think Trudeau is on a roll, and he's even more on a roll. I think Stephen Harper did well. Tom Mulcair, sadly, not so much. But I'm going to come back to where I started. In 2006, when Canada was already embarked on one of its largest overseas missions that cost billions of dollars and more than 150 lives, there was not one single question during the leaders' debate on Afghanistan. We just had a full debate, a 2-hour debate on foreign policy. Good on us for doing it.
Doug Saunders, last brief word to you.
We also just had a debate that didn't mention Afghanistan except nominally. So we've come full circle in a way, I think, and I think it's a scaling back of ambitions on all the parties. I think that might work in Prime Minister Harper's favor, in that nobody wants to do anything very bold in this election.
On that note, we will leave it here. I want to thank my panelists, John Ibbitson from the Globe and Mail, Doug Saunders from the Globe and Mail. Down at the end of the desk, we had Janice Stein. She had to run to do the CBC. She might be on right at this moment. And of course, Kevin Chan from Facebook joined us this evening. Thank you all for watching. Have a good night.